Shalom and welcome to this special Christmas edition of the Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be looking at the plight of Christians in Iraq after their towns and villages have been liberated from ISIS, and we'll be asking how will they be celebrating Christmas this year. Warm welcome to the programme. And my guest today is my good friend, Pastor Wagih from the London Arabic Evangelical Church. Wagih, warm welcome to the programme.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. I'm very glad to be with you again. Every time I come to Revelation TV and your show here, I'm very happy to be here, enjoying it very much.
You got the special guest of honour because, this is the Christmas edition of the Middle East Report, and many of our viewers will be watching this as we approach Christmas Day.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be with you, and Merry Christmas to everyone.
Excellent. And Wagih, can I ask you, because only as a recording of this programme, you've only just got back from your recent trip to Iraq to visit many of the Christian communities there that had to flee from ISIS in the summer of 2014, find themselves in kind of refugee-style camps, particularly in areas of Kurdistan and near Erbil. Can you give us a bit of an insight into the situation that they're currently facing?
Yeah, actually, there was a lot of things happening there. I just came back. Even my trip wasn't easy because the airport at Erbil is closed. So the only way to go there is through other countries or to go through Baghdad. And going through Baghdad is not easy at all for me. So I had to go through Turkey. And my trip in took around 20-something hours, and my trip back took around 30 hours to come back to London. So while if it is direct flight, it will be 5 hours. So it is very tough situation there. Some people returned back to Mosul, but they couldn't survive, and then they came back again. And some are trying to start their life again in Mosul, which is unbelievably difficult. Part of Mosul completely demolished. So even if you go there, you don't know where your house or your flat were. So you cannot find where you are exactly. It is a big lie saying that people are returning, that people are more suffering for what's happened. As well, the number of IDPs or displaced people are increasing very much inside the Kurdistani cities like Duhok, Zakho, or Erbil, or Salmaniya. So yes, as well I met with a number of girls and boys returning back from ISIS after they were in slavery. That was a very dramatic stories to hear. It's not easy to emotionally to carry on hearing these stories, but it was real. Some of them were there for 3 years, sold around 7 to 10 times. When I'm saying sold in slavery, so sold from 1 to 1. And even when they take the freedom to return, they had no way to return. And I met with girls, they were there, or they've been taken when they were 12 years old. And now they are 15, and their families bought them with a huge amount of money to take them back. After these girls were sold around 10 times to different men, and went into slavery for 3 years. It is tough stories to hear, but as well there is a number of people who, one of the families, for example, lost 77 people from this family were taken. When I say family, means uncles and so a big family, and 77 people were taken. Some of them returned, and still 43 not returned yet. I'm talking about the boys and girls and women being taken. I met with the number around 7 or 8 from the return group from the family. It is very sad stories. So, yes, ISIS is limited now inside the cities of Iraq and some of Syria, but still these people and the trauma they went through is not finished yet.
No, I can imagine. Wagih, can you remind us how the Lord really placed the plight of the Iraqi Christians upon your heart? Because you're an Egyptian by background.
Yeah.
And particularly in the aftermath of the horrendous situation that those Christians faced at the hands of ISIS back in the summer of 2014.
Yeah, actually, the end of the summer 2014, I was shocked with what happened, and I was in a visit to Egypt, and we had a chat with a group of people to help, and we were thinking to go just with some aid to help them. And unfortunately, between the two governments, the Egyptian government and the Iraqi government, the medical aid we collected couldn't go. So we decided to cancel the trip at the end, but I felt a calling in my heart to go by myself. So I went there for 3 days. Actually, it was less than 3 days, less than 72 hours. And I saw the people on the street sleeping in different places everywhere, in the church halls or in the unfinished buildings. And it was one of the saddest things I felt in my life. In my way back, I was in a flight between Erbil and Cairo. I asked the Lord why I went through this experience. And the flight was nearly empty. We were less than 10 people in the flight. And for the first time in my life, and at the last I didn't have this experience before, and after that I felt someone sitting beside me. And he said to me, you went through this to love these people and to make a voice for them so the church can pray for them, and then to make a space for Jesus inside the camps. So I said to him, okay, I know how to love these people. I would recruit teams and I go and we love these people. I can do TV programs and encourage the church to pray for them. But how can I make a space for Jesus inside the camp? And he disappeared. I couldn't stop my tears for a while. And then I came back to London. I spoke to my church about what happened. And at that time, I said, I'm going in 2 weeks' time. Who will come with me? And I collected some fund from friends and from the church. And we went, 5 of us, to love these people. And we, during this trip, I had the opportunity to visit the UN office, as a friend of mine who's here have his NGO working in different places in the world called Lifeline. So Lifeline arranged a meeting for me with the UN, and during this meeting they spoke to us about a lot of needs. In my way out of the UN camp, I heard the same voice I had in the plane saying to me about one of the ideas, because one of the ideas was to produce bread to those people. And he said to me, this is how to make a space for Jesus inside the camp. Build bakeries. I had at that time my church treasurer. She was with me in the meeting. So I said to her, you know, we will build camps. We will build bakeries inside the camps. And she said to me, we don't have money. You know the treasurer all the time. How they see things was the reality. But by God's grace, we in 2015 we built 5 bakeries inside the camps, and Lifeline was a very generous help. They gave us the name, so we are now part of Lifeline, and we registered NGO in northern Iraq called Lifeline Kurdistan. And through this, we started different other projects, medical projects, and educational projects. And the need of education now is beyond the imaginations, because all these people who displaced from their places, they are not allowed to go to schools. So you'll find someone 16 years old and his education is still year 4.
Yeah.
So in my last trip, in this trip, I had a contract with the Kurdistani government, and I couldn't believe it went through, that we can open educational center to make these people do 2 years in one. So in the first term, we can teach them year 4. And they have the exams, and then they can do year 5. I'm talking about girls and boys who are 12 to 20 years old, but with very low knowledge and education. So they can catch part of what they lost. So we have this permission now, and we hope to open this educational center soon.
Fantastic. So let's look at the plight of Christians in Iraq now that the lost pockets of ISIS resistance have been broken down, and what is life like now post-ISIS?
These are the sights of victory, people dancing and waving flags in the streets, and these are the sounds, commanders declaring historic success against ISIS.
Over the last 3 years, through Iraqi determination, ISIS has been on an increasingly rapid decline, losing Tikrit, Ramadi, Fallujah, and now Mosul. Iraqi security forces, on the other hand, have only improved and gotten stronger.
This victory today, it's not a victory of Iraqi people. This is a victory for the whole world, a world that suffered from the acts of these terrorists everywhere.
And the suffering remains, as you can see from this drone footage of Mosul's old city. It shows widespread devastation on a massive scale. Buildings reduced to rubble and smoke from occasional airstrikes still rising into the sky.
We were over there back in April, and what we saw was that, the Sunnis, ISIS, went through and spray painted each home. And they said this is either a Sunni home, a Shia home, or a Christian home. And if it was Shia or if it was Christian, the place, they put a barrel of oil in it and lit it on fire. And you can imagine what that does to a structure.
Jeff King is the president of International Christian Concern, a nonprofit organization which acts as a bridge between believers in free countries and those in persecuted countries. Just back from Iraq, King says rebuilding and giving viability to the people of Iraq will be far beyond the capabilities of the Iraqi government, especially for the thousands of Christians and other religious minority leaders who were forced from their homes due to ISIS, many with only the clothes on their backs. His team took these pictures, images of Jesus used as target practice by ISIS fighters. In another church, the statue of Mary shot up to where only pieces of her face remained.
We saw these images over and over. Generally, the idea is to desecrate. They want to push the Christians out. If they're not going to convert to Islam, they want them out of the country. They want them out of the area.
King says much of the U.S. aid is channeled away from Christians once it gets to Iraq due to the dominant Muslim religion. So his organization works with Capitol Hill lawmakers to specifically help Christians in the war-torn region. He says statistics show that of the 1.5 million Christians calling Iraq home in 2003, only about 250,000 remain. King told us the majority of Christians his workers spoke with want to come back. They just need the new government of Iraq to protect them.
When that help comes, when that touch comes, they praise God like crazy, and they say, my gosh, we're part of something so big.
A family doing God's work here on earth, supporting each other. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Excellent report there by CBN, but you can see from those images the devastation caused in Mosul by ISIS fighters and also allied forces trying to push back the ISIS advance. Very distressing scenes on that report by CBN, Wagih, particularly in Mosul. Are there any plans by the international community and others then to rebuild some of these towns and cities that the Christians used to live in, such as Nineveh and other places in Iraq?
I think there is a lot of talk about this, but how long that will take and where the Christians will be at that point. If you look at this report, it's telling you how many Christians left the country already. And now, praise the Lord, there is a lot of conversion because Islam is unveiled in front of the number of people in Iraq, as well as Yazidis can see the Lord. And the work of the Lord is beyond our human capacity, as he himself appeared in visions and dreams. So amazing. They come to him through his way of evangelism, because the church is not doing her part yet. So about returning back or rebuilding the cities, I don't think that will happen in a day. It will take a very long time, especially, you know, as I said before, that there is a number of people returning back to their villages and they couldn't survive, and they decided to come back to Kurdistan again. And I met some of them already, so I'm first-hand met people. But the problem, as you saw in this report, that they were using Christian pictures like the image of Jesus and Mary to disregard the Christian way of thinking or the Christian beliefs. I think that's happening because when you understand Islam is to submit. The meaning of Islam is to submit or to surrender. So if ISIS left as an army, but the ISIS mind is not left, the ISIS ideology is not left yet. So when we talk about the people, the Christians can return back, they have a fear to return back to the same way of ideology, the same way of thinking. So how can, if I'm a Christian, left my home in Mosul and stayed in one of the camps for a while, and now I have the way to return back, I will think twice before I go, because my neighbors, as you saw in the report as well, my neighbors who pointed about my house saying I'm a Christian, and that happened to me. So because the ideology itself, the theology of Islam, there is a theology called the fitra in Islam. The fitra mean that everyone from Adam to me, to you, to everybody, from the beginning of the creation is a Muslim by fitra. So we were born Muslims. Jesus was a Muslim. Moses was a Muslim. That's the theology of Islam, and it's not only in one verse in the Quran. It's say, for example, ad-dinu 'inda Allah al-Islam, which means the religion God recognized or Allah recognized is only Islam, no other religion but Islam. So that's why you have to surrender to the Islamic belief. The people flee from what's happening. It's not easy for them to return back. So if Mosul will be rebuilt, that will not be for Christians to return back. or even Yazidis.
Yeah. I mean, many people now, particularly the American government, many European governments, including the Iraqi government, will be celebrating what looks like the defeat of ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq, and their ambition to establish the caliphate in both Iraq and Syria. But in your opinion, is this the end of ISIS, or are we going to see something in the next few years that is more deadly, is more violent, is more extreme, is more horrific?
To be honest, if you look at the history, how ISIS came to us, there is a long history in the modern days, if you say the 20th century and 21st century. Started by ideology coming from the Quran, which is taught by one of the main theologian or the main faqih in Arabic, which is called Al-Mawdudi. Al-Mawdudi is the one who discipled Muslims in Pakistan and part of India. And then the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and in the Middle East were inheriting the same kind of ideology. So Sayyid Qutb and Mawdudi is the main theologians, the Egyptian one and the Pakistani one. And these two marry, if I can say, as ideologies in Afghanistan during the war. And during the Afghanistan war, that was the main start of the new wave of the Islamic fundamentalism, if I can say.
Going back to 79, so really with the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in 79,
so,
with Mujahideen.
Yes, and beginning of the 80s. So I'm talking about around 40 years from now. So after the start of this, we can see different kind of groups came up. And the big one was Al-Qaeda. So Al-Qaeda started as the daughter of this kind of ideology or theology. So they come out of this. And by the death of Osama bin Laden, other leaders started to rise, like Zarqawi, and then Zarqawi being killed, and there were a fight or a challenge between different leaders who will apply or fulfill the Islamic State. And Ayman al-Zawahiri was one side, and al-Baghdadi was another side. And then al-Baghdadi, Ayman al-Zawahiri was the plan of the Arabic Spring in the Middle East, that Ayman will return back to Sinai and start the caliphate or the Islamic State from Egypt. And when that defeated by the Egyptian army, when they didn't allow that to happen, and the Muslim Brotherhood left the authority in Egypt, then we saw al-Baghdadi started to rise up. And it started what they call the ISIS, which is the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. And then they call it ISIL after that. They wanted not to be just Syria and Iraq, but to be Islamic State, that's it, to be everywhere. When this war was during the last year, and the secular armies in the US and others say they finished ISIS. As I said previously, that the ideology is still there, the thinking is still there. So I believe from the history that there is a new wave. We don't know what would be called. Maybe starting somewhere else, not exactly in Syria and Iraq. What happened in Egypt last week, bombing a mosque. This mosque was a Sufi mosque. Sufism in Islam is something close to the charismatic church, if you compare it in Christian faith. And the Sunni is like the Orthodox or the Catholic or the traditional church. So when you find that the war in Iraq and Syria was Sunni against Shia, now there is a new war between Sunni and Sufism. And around 300 people killed in one mosque. So I think there is a beginning of something different, but it's coming from the same kind of ideology and thinking.
Yeah. Let's go and have a look at this report now that looks at life beyond ISIS and what those ISIS terrorists potentially could do now.
Terrorist group ISIS is losing. At the end of 2014, it claimed a territory the size of Great Britain and a population of 11 million people. But today it's lost about 60% of that, and its population is down to about 2.5 million. It's the result of fighting its enemies on all sides. To the west and north, ISIS is fighting armed rebel groups and the Russia-backed Syrian military and its allies. It's also fighting Turkish troops and US-backed Kurdish forces in the north. And to the east and south, there's the US-backed Iraqi army. It was this Iraqi army that delivered the latest blow, when they took over ISIS's biggest city, Mosul, the group's capital in Iraq. It was a symbolic loss. Mosul is where the group declared a caliphate, or Islamic territory, in 2014. This set them apart from other terrorist organizations. They weren't just a network of jihadists strung out across several countries, like Al-Qaeda. They governed actual territory, which they called the Islamic State. Now with the loss of Mosul, the fall of this ISIS caliphate seems imminent. So, what happens when ISIS is gone?
So problem number one is that these fighters are going to want to go home. So in 2014, when ISIS captured a huge swath of territory in Iraq and Syria, tens of thousands of foreign fighters came from all over the world to join the caliphate. According to UN estimates, as of July 2016, there were upwards of 30,000 foreign fighters. So most of these fighters came from countries like Tunisia, Morocco, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, but hundreds also came from countries like Belgium, Germany, the UK, and even a few dozen from the United States. So these fighters were drawn to ISIS for all sorts of different reasons, but a big one was that it had actual territory and was supposed to be building a caliphate based on its own extreme interpretation of Islamic law. ISIS propaganda pushed this narrative in flashy, violent videos and magazines online, encouraging people from all walks of life, not just fighters, to come and help build this glorious Islamic state. And the people who came were not just young men, they weren't just fighters, there were women, children, and even families who came as well. But now, as ISIS's territory shrinks and the state that they tried to build collapses, anyone who survives will have to find somewhere else to go. And that's a major problem, because many of these people are now indoctrinated, they're now well connected, and they're capable of carrying out deadly terror attacks. A similar dynamic actually happened back in the 1980s in Afghanistan. So thousands of foreign fighters flocked to Afghanistan to help the Afghan Mujahideen fight the Soviet invasion. And after the Soviets left, a lot of these fighters dispersed to various different theaters of jihad, including Bosnia, Chechnya, Somalia, Sudan, and elsewhere. These fighters ended up forming a loose network of transnational jihadists, most of whom had links to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, thanks to their time fighting in Afghanistan. And some of them actually went on to carry out attacks against the West, including attacks against the United States. So the worry now is that ISIS fighters will do something similar, but this time they might actually make it home to places like Europe and launch attacks there.
So the second problem is what to do with the US military after ISIS falls. Right now, the US is helping local forces in Iraq and Syria to defeat ISIS. There are currently around 1,000 US troops in Syria and around 6,000 US troops in Iraq. Mosul, which was ISIS's capital in Iraq, has fallen, and right now the US is helping Syrian local forces to defeat ISIS in Raqqa, its so-called capital there. So as those two cities fall, ISIS has been spreading out to rural areas. The Trump administration has two choices. Option one is to keep the US troops there, which would leave them in harm's way. Or option two is to bring them home, which increases the risk that the region breaks out into war again. Option one is a big political risk for Trump. He promised during the campaign that he would not get involved in foreign wars, that he would actually invest American money and time at jobs and resources in the United States. And so if Trump were to keep troops in the region, he would be admitting that he's going against the political philosophy he espoused during the campaign and currently during his presidency. Option two is definitely also a risk for Trump. If US troops were to leave, that opens a space for sectarian violence to break out in the region. Let's take a look, for example, at what happened in 2011. When the Obama administration took most of its troops out of the region, that gave the Shiite government in Baghdad the space to crack down on Sunni populations throughout the country. And ISIS took advantage of that. ISIS was seen as the defender against the Shiite government and was able to gain support and allowed for its rise to continue. So while it doesn't necessarily mean that if troops leave, an ISIS-type group or ISIS 2.0 itself would grow out of that absence of U.S. troops, but that risk certainly exists.
A deadly California shooting rampage. A lone gunman to pledge allegiance to ISIS.
Both incidents carried out by so-called lone wolves.
Problem number 3 is ISIS moving from a place to an idea. Up until now, ISIS had one goal: defend the territory it already had in Iraq and the territory it already had in Syria. The problem is it's on the verge of losing both. And when that happens, ISIS goes from being the kind of place people go to fight to being the idea that people fight for. And it's an idea that's compelling. It's an idea that its followers are willing to kill for and that its followers are willing to die for. When it first came to power, people thought it's a group that has its own territory, it wants to control that territory, but it's not Al-Qaeda. It's not a terror group that wants to carry out attacks outside of its borders, in the West. That was proven tragically wrong in October of 2015.
This is the bomb ISIS claims they used to bring down the Russian passenger plane over the Sinai Peninsula.
In their online magazine, they posted photos of the bomb that they said had been used to blow up the plane. And that was a reminder of what was about to come. A wave of ISIS attacks that have killed hundreds of people in London, in Paris, in Nice, and have inspired attacks that have killed dozens here at home, in California and in Orlando. It's worth remembering that these are not always attacks carried out by people who are part of ISIS. In many cases, these are people who are radicalized in the countries where they lived. And that's the danger of the idea. Take what happened in San Bernardino, California, where a married couple killed 14 people. Or in Orlando, where a single shooter killed 49 people. In both cases, ISIS claimed responsibility, but in both cases, there was no connection between those people and ISIS. They got radicalized over the internet. ISIS has known that propaganda matters, and ISIS is really good at it. It has people all over the world who use English language, Arabic language, to have Facebook pages and Twitter accounts that are full of incredibly slickly produced videos. They're really compelling. And if you're someone predisposed to have that worldview, they can push you over the edge from just thinking that's an idea worth killing for to actually killing for it. ISIS takes it so seriously that it refers to these people as media operatives and says those media operatives are carrying out a form of martyrdom akin to killing, to literally killing for the cause. And at the end of the day, that's the hardest thing about ISIS. It can be beaten on the ground in Iraq and Syria. It is being beaten on the ground in Iraq and Syria. But it's going from being a place to an idea. And it is impossible to defeat an idea.
Very chilling, sadly, and has ramifications for Britain, Europe, and the West. Pastor Wagih, a very chilling but very interesting report there on ISIS now that their so-called Islamic Caliphate is collapsing and they're losing territory in both Iraq and in Syria as well. So really, is there a great danger now? Because what we've seen over the last few years is unprecedented waves of terrorist attacks really in Europe. We saw the attack on the Charlie Hebdo, the cartoon headquarters in Paris back in January 2015, followed by other waves of attacks in France in 2015, 2016, and then also in Germany. But this year, Britain has faced 3 very big Islamic terrorist attacks. The Westminster Bridge in March, followed then by the horrendous attack at Manchester Arena just before the election, and then also then the attack on Westminster Bridge as well. Is this a wake-up call to the West, who once thought it was immune from all the problems in the Middle East, and particularly the problem of Islamic extremism? Has that danger now come to Britain and Europe?
Yeah, I think he actually the report is very clear, and the end of it when he said that it's transformed now from place to idea. It's good that the West start to wake up to say it is transformed. It is not transformed. It's from the beginning an idea. It is the way of thinking. They said during this program that Islam believe in a fitra. So the fitra means that everyone is a Muslim. Even Abraham was a Muslim. Adam was a Muslim. Jesus himself is a Muslim. So that's why they want to convert all human beings to this fitra again. And by converting them, there is 4 steps. The first step is the hijrah, which is the migration. Like what the Prophet have done in his life, is he immigrated to convert other city to his ideology. So the ideology of conversion is starting with the hijrah. That's the main reason behind the immigration coming to the West from the Islamic part of the world. So the immigration, even what happened to Europe after what in 2015, 2016, and the number of people came to Europe as refugees from the Islamic countries. Yes, there is a lot of human needs. There is a lot of innocent people inside, but the ideology behind this, the Islamic ideology behind this, is the migration. After the migration, there is another 2 main steps. One is called taqiyya, and taqiyya mean they are allowed to lie until they take the position. And when they take the position, they have to apply the jihad or the rules. And the rules is to be surrendered or submit to Islam. If you refuse to surrender or to submit to Islam, you will be in trouble. And that's what I'm saying is the taqiyya will lead to the power, and the power, they call it tamkeen. Tamkeen means they will take the position. As soon as they got the position, they will. That's what happened in Syria and Iraq. As soon as they felt like the American troops left, and it become like Shia government, here the Sunnis started to take place, and those people were just underground, and it started to apply the ideology. What's happening in the West is exactly the same. Since 1970s, we started to receive immigration to the UK. Islam in the UK at the time was just 0.3% of the population. By the last census happened in the UK, the result was 4.8%. So the increasing, bringing people in positions. So the taqiyya they apply after the hijrah, that's people taking positions. So you will find people in a position, in political positions, in the army, in the police, and everywhere, taking positions in the country. And that's the tamkeen. Okay, and as soon as they come to the tamkeen, they will apply the jihad. So that's the sequence. If you look at the Quranic sequence, the hadith sequence, the history sequence, that's the way. They start from that's the brainwash happened on the internet to the Muslims who were born in the West and grew up in the West and went to the Western universities. The brainwash is about the fitrah. All those people around you should be Muslim because by fitrah they should be a Muslim. So as soon as this guy or this girl accepted the idea of the fitrah, will go easily to apply taqiyya, to apply tamkeen, and then to take over the country and then fight to fulfill the divine state. So what's happening here, if we understand the Islamic teaching, we'll see it as a clear ideology of the only divine state should be an Islamic state.
Interesting. And Wagih, you have to go back to reference to the plight of Iraqi Christians in particular. How will they be celebrating this Christmas? Will they be celebrating? And what are some of their needs at this Christmas?
Actually, again, a number of people will celebrate Christmas in the refugee camps. When I say about number of people, I've said hundreds of thousands people. But as well, there is a number of people who will have no opportunity even to celebrate anything. The Christians flee from Iraq and Syria with numbers. But on the other hand, as I said, there is a big conversion. So some of them will have some opportunities to celebrate because they are happy that they came to Christ. The good news that the people converted from Islam and Yazidis are much more stronger than Christians themselves. So I think the Christmas this year in some places in Iraq and Syria will be different because of the number of conversion. When I say about conversion, I say there is churches now announced on Sunday easily that the baptism next week will be for 26 people coming from Islam. So that's not a secret thing. So it's because people come into Christ with big numbers in different places, and nobody can stop them. As I said, that the Lord Himself approached them and reached them, and the church have no option but to receive them. I've been to one of the churches in the Middle East. I will not mention the country, but I was preaching, and the attendees was a big number, and around 40 to 50 at least Muslims were attending. They were still Muslims. And after the service, I said to the pastor, that's amazing to see veiled people and peers and all this in the church. And he said to me, they are coming every Sunday. So the service was around 10 o'clock in the morning and finished around 12. He said to me, we have another service especially for them from 1 to 4. So these people go to the church at 10 o'clock in the morning and leave the church at 4 o'clock.
That's incredible commitment.
So most Christians will not be happy to attend longer service than 1 hour.
So
I think these people will celebrate Christmas as a part of a new life.
Let's look at this news item about Iraqi Christians celebrating Christmas last year in light of the liberation from ISIS.
Under heavy protection, Iraqi Christians celebrate what they call the Christmas miracle. For many, it's close to a miracle that they can return to their church in the town of Bartella. This is the first Christmas ceremony here for 2.5 years.
This is important to us. We are scared of ISIL, but we are happy that we can do our religious service.
For 2.5 years, ISIL controlled this mainly Christian town, forcing thousands to flee to displaced camps. Iraqi forces recaptured Bartella only 2 months ago.
Christians are delighted to be back here to celebrate Christmas Eve, but this is far from a return to normal life. There are hundreds of soldiers in this church alone protecting the congregation, and it's a sign of just how precarious the situation is for Christians here in northern Iraq.
Beyond the church, buildings and homes are destroyed or booby-trapped with explosives left behind by ISIL. No one lives in this ghost town. The congregation arrived by bus under heavy protection. In the distance, you can hear the occasional explosion as the Iraqi army and ISIL battle for the city of Mosul. ISIL ended up controlling many majority Christian villages when it took over large parts of northern Iraq. Christians, a religious minority in Iraq, fled, fearing mass murder by ISIL zealots. In this church in the town of Karamalesh, ISIL turned the church's garden into a fortified fighting position.
This was a sniper's nest, a shooting point, and it was from here ISIL fighters shot at the advancing Iraqi army.
At the Catholic church here in Karamalesh, young Christians decorate the Christmas tree. For them, it's an act of defiance, looking to brighten the shadows left by ISIL.
We put this green color indeed to the life, to the hope.
This experience of fleeing their homes and living in camps for the displaced has been traumatic for the Christians.
No justice here in Iraq for the Christian. many groups fighting between them. We are the victim of this fighting here in Iraq. So we need to be protected by the international community.
Christians can't return home because these towns don't even have the basic services of water and electricity. So they continue living in displaced people's camps, or the lucky ones, with relatives. Back at the church service, Christians consider their future as a minority in Iraq. By some estimates, there were 1.5 million Iraqi Christians in 2003. Now media reports say less than a third remain. Those who stayed are wondering if it's not time to join the others.
Christians are worried. We can only come here for 2 hours with the army. Otherwise, we couldn't come. Maybe half of us are thinking of moving abroad.
They waited 2.5 years for their first Christmas back at the church. Now, some may decide that this could be their last Christmas in Iraq. Toby Muse, CCTV, Bartella, Iraq.
Let's pray and hope that Iraqi Christians have a better Christmas this year than they did last year. What do you say? It's important, isn't it, Wagih, that the Christian community, despite the horrendous persecution, particularly as we've seen really since 2003 with the liberation of Iraq from Saddam Hussein's evil dictatorship, that Christians remain there. What is the danger if all of the Christians decide to leave Iraq and most of the Middle East for Christianity in the region? Or do you see something more organic emerge with these new converts from Islam taking on a new form of brave and courageous Christianity that we haven't seen in the Middle East before?
Yeah, actually I can see a positive side of the migration, though I would love Christians to stay in Iraq. I just visited one of the villages we used to visit called Dawudiyya, and Dawudiyya had a camp, was a unique camp, had a mix of Christians, Yazidis and Muslims. And I found that no Christians there, all of them immigrated. So unfortunately the UN and the other international organizations helping Christians to leave, as soon as they reach Jordan or Lebanon, they can have application and leave the country to any European country. The positive side of it, that a lot of them accept Christ in the West and find a way to know the Lord. As you may know, that most of these churches are very traditional churches, and a big number of Iraqis had no opportunity to read the Bible before, even if they are non-immigrant Christians. So the opportunity to be reached by the gospel in the West is a big opportunity. And that's why the local churches, the Arabic churches in the West, now growing in number with Syrians and Iraqis. And though as well that if you go to a country like Germany, you will find that a big number of them joined German churches. So there is some German churches found themselves as a 50 members, and a church of 50 members found 150 Syrians came to the church. So it is a kind of revival. And even though the number of people converted in the West, I believe they will do a good work to convert Westerns to the Lord as well. So it is a healthy thing to the Western Church. But on the other hand, I can see the big conversion inside Iraq and Syria, who might do a new church. The new church will be much more stronger than the old church.
Very quickly, I just have two very quick questions for you before we wrap up the program, Wagih. The first thing is, what are the humanitarian needs of the Christian communities in Iraq? And secondly, can you tell us what a traditional Arabic Christmas is?
Okay. The humanitarian needs, we still need a big support for the bakeries we have. The bakeries stop and continue depend on the fund we have. The one British pounds can give us a day, can give us opportunity to give bread for one family of 6 people. So that's a big need inside the camps, plus the need of medical things. So we recruit teams and we try to help people, and educational side, as I said. About the Christmas in the Middle East, if we say Egypt as an example, the Egyptian church, they fast 40 days before Christmas, and they celebrate from the Christmas Eve till the Christmas day, the breakfast, and as well they breaking their fast and they celebrate the birth of Jesus. Actually, they break the fast with the meat because they fast with vegetable, and but as an Egyptian, I left Egypt 20-something years ago, but before that we were doing this every year with the traditional church, the Coptic Orthodox Church. But celebrating Christmas as well is different date. So we are here celebrating on the 25th of January, but in Egypt we celebrate in the 7th of January. 25th of December, they celebrate in 7th of January.
So you can have 2 Christmases.
So we have 2 Christmases.
Very briefly, within 30 seconds, how can we lift up the Iraqi Christians in prayer?
Actually, first of all, pray for the persecuted Christians in Iraq. Pray for the non-Muslim Christians to know the Lord. Pray for the new conversion, the people coming to Christ from Islam and Yazidis to continue in their as a disciples of Christ.
Pastor Wagih, thank you so much for enlightening us on this Christmas edition of the Middle East Report.
Thank you.
And well done for the incredible work that you are doing.
Bless you.
And
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
It's very
And
encouraging.
I just want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report. This is a Christmas special, and this is an opportunity that I want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a very prosperous and happy New Year. May the Lord continue to go with you into the new year. And but let's reflect and think upon the plight of Christians in the Middle East this Christmas. I'll leave you with this beautiful Christmas carol that's sung by an Arabic choir, and I want to thank you for watching today's program.
When Harold realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Matthew 2:16.
Jewish mission.